Good morning, everyone. Today we will be discussing about clinical psychology, and this is for week one. So, the introduction to clinical psychology. So, what is a clinical psychology? This course aims to provide students with basic understanding of the nature, scope, and techniques used in the field of counseling, psychology, including approaches in assessments and intervention in various psychological disorders. The course also discusses the roles, function, and ethical consideration involved in the practice of the profession. So let's start with understanding what is clinical psychology. So, as a definition of clinical psychology, it is adopted by the American Psychological Association. Division of Clinical Psychology reads as follows. The field of psychology integrates science, theory, and practice to understand and predict and alleviate maladjustment, disability, and discomfort, as well as to promote human adaptation, adjustment, and personal development. So in this definition, as adopted by the American Psychological Association, the clinical psychology focuses on intellectual, emotional, biological, social, and behavioral aspects of human functioning across the lifespan in varying cultures and all socioeconomic levels. As you can see, the definition focuses on the integration of science and practice, the application of this integrated knowledge across diverse human population as the purpose of alleviating human suffering and promoting health. But what are the requirements to become a clinical psychologist? So for the clinical psychologist, certain requirements for those wishing to be clinical psychologists have to do more with attitudes and character rather than training and credentialing. Perhaps the most notable distinguishing feature of clinical psychologists have been called the clinical attitude or the clinical approach, which is the tendency to combine knowledge from research on human behavior and mental processes with efforts at individual assessment in order to understand and help a particular person. The clinical attitude sets clinicians apart from other psychologists who search for general principles that apply to human behavior problems in general. Clinical psychologists are interested in research of this kind, but they also want to know how general principles shape lives, problems, and treatments on individual level. So we will go on the legal, education, and ethical requirements to become a clinical psychologist. What are those? For this, one of the psychology health service provider subfields, clinical psychology requires its practitioner to receive a specific training. In addition to having a degree from accredited institution, those who practice clinical psychology must be licensed or certified to do so by state and national agencies. So for this requirement, this is the tendency to combine knowledge, or this is in the United States and also in Canada. Each state province establishes the requirements for licensure. In clinical psychology, awards licenses to those who qualify and retains the power to penalize or revoke the licenses of those who violate licensing laws. In other words, clinical psychology, like medicine, pharmacy, law, and dentistry, is a legally regulated profession. Legal requirements vary not only by state, but also by levels of training. For instance, in most states, a full licensed clinical psychology allows one to participate or to practice independently to hang out a shingle. Fully licensed clinicians can rent or own their offices, set fees, establish work hours, bill insurance companies and other third parties, consult, testify in court, and engage in any number of other activities characteristic of independent private practice. So aside from that, what are the other requirements? The second requirements is for the education. For the education, students complete substantial advanced coursework, psychopathology, assessment, and intervention strategies, and they become involved in conducting clinical research. Most states also require continuing education training for periodic renewal of licenses. So, how much additional education beyond the bachelor's is required for you to become a clinical psychologist? An earned doctorate from accredited program is the basic educational requirement for clinical psychologist licensure, the American Psychological Association. Students complete substantial advanced coursework, as I mentioned, the psychopathology, assessment, and intervention strategies, as they become involved in conducting clinical research. Most states also require continuing education training for the periodic renewal of licenses. For the doctoral level degrees for fully licensed clinical psychologists are typically either PhD or the PSYD, though the occasional include others like at EDD or Doctor of Education. The PhD and PsyD decrease both stress-intensive clinical training and preparation for clinical practice, but they differ in the extent to which science and research are stressed. Later in this chapter and in subsequent chapters, we will explain the differences of these two models of training and describe the debates about the advantages and disadvantages of each. For now, just be aware that the number of doctoral level psychologists produced by the two models have shifted. The PSYD programs now accept and graduate more doctoral level clinical psychologists than PhD programs do. So aside from education, the legality and the education, another requirement for you is to have the experience. Some term of supervised practice in field often embodied in successful completion and approved practicum. Internship or period of supervision is also a critical part of clinical psychologists' required training. The duration of supervised practice varies, but 1 year and 2-year internships are common. Students are typically paid a modest stipend during their internship. So another one for the requirements is for you to have a testing of competence. To be a licensed clinical psychologist, candidates must declare to licensing board their areas of competence, and they must pass a comprehensive examination, often called a licensing board exam, which may include both written and oral components. And there is also a requirement for having a good character. Prospective clinical psychologists must show the physical, mental, and moral capability to engage in the competent practice of the profession. This characteristic is often donated by letters of recommendations and by the absence of ethical or legal violation. Practitioners of clinical psychology should also know the ethical codes that guide practice. The American Psychological Association Ethical Principle of Psychologists and Code of Conduct. This referred to hereafter or the Ethics Code. As publication offers guidance on ethical concerns related to competence, human relation, privacy, confidentiality, record keeping, education and training, therapy, and many other situations. It is very especially useful in navigating the gray areas that invariably come up in the practice of clinical psychology. Of course, all practitioners should know the obligations, freedoms, and limitations that go with practice under this level of licensure and in their state. Familiarity with the ethic codes as well as with state and federal laws is necessary for psychologists to become effective and avoid professional mistakes that could have serious consequences. But as suggested earlier, not all do. Rather than specialize in assessment and treatment, some choose to engage primarily in some combination of teaching, research, consulting, or administration, while doing little or no direct service delivery, but non-practicing clinical psychologists. So that is the last slide that we have for today. Thank you for your participation and good luck.